So a couple weeks ago, I opened one of those roommate finder apps just to see what was out there, and the first message that popped into my inbox was from a guy named Corey asking if I was chill, and if I party a lot, and I stared at that message for a solid minute before I closed the app and just sat there on my kitchen floor. Not because the message was weird. It wasn't even weird, it was just a normal roommate app question. I sat there because I realized I hadn't looked for a new roommate in 4 years, and the reason I hadn't is a person, and I haven't said his name out loud in a while, so bear with me if this comes out a little rough. His name was Theo. We met the way a lot of people our age meet, through a mutual friend who was moving to Portland and needed someone to take over her room fast. And Theo needed a place because his lease had fallen through in some complicated way he never fully explained. I remember the first time he came to look at the apartment, he was wearing a jacket that was way too warm for the weather, and he kept apologizing for things that didn't need an apology, like, sorry, is it okay if I open a window, in a place that was already his half the time he lived there. I liked him instantly in the most boring, unremarkable way. Like, oh, this guy seems easy to live with. That was it. That was the whole spark. There was no spark. For the first year, it really was just roommate stuff. We split the Wi-Fi bill, we had a system for whose turn it was to buy paper towels, we watched a lot of competitive baking shows because neither of us would admit we liked them until we'd already watched 4 seasons together. He worked some kind of scheduling job that stressed him out in a way he never fully complained about, just went quiet about, and I was finishing up a degree I wasn't sure I wanted, and somewhere in there we became actual friends. Not close friends, not yet. Just, the kind of friends who leave the bathroom door unlocked and don't think twice about it. I want to be honest that I didn't know I was gay in any settled way when Theo moved in. I'd had a thing in college that I mostly explained away, a thing with a guy named Marcus that I told myself was a fluke. A we were drunk situation, even though we did it more than once and it was never really drunk the second or third time. So when I say I liked living with Theo, I mean I liked living with Theo the way you like a good roommate. And I want you to sit in that with me for a second, because that denial is basically the whole first act of this story. The apartment had 2 bedrooms on opposite ends of a narrow hallway with the kitchen and a lopsided couch in between. Cheap building, thin walls, radiator that clanked at 2 in the morning like it was trying to say something. I bring up the radiator because it matters later, I promise. There's this one memory from early on that I didn't think meant anything at the time, but I keep coming back to it now. About 4 months in, I got food poisoning bad, the kind where you're not sure if you should call someone or just accept your fate on the bathroom floor. Theo had a work thing that night, some mandatory dinner with his team, and I told him I was fine, I'll just sleep it off. He went. And then he came back early, way earlier than the dinner should have ended, and when I asked why, he just shrugged and said the food there looked worse than what I probably had, which wasn't even funny, but I laughed anyway because I was so relieved not to be alone. He sat on the bathroom floor with me for an hour holding my hair back like it was nothing, like it wasn't a slightly insane thing for a roommate to do, and at one point he said, half joking, if you die on my watch my mom's never going to let me live it down, and I threw a wet washcloth at him, and he caught it laughing and neither of us thought anything of it. That's the thing about this whole story looking back. None of the moments that mattered most felt like they mattered at the time. Okay, so the shift. People always want a single dramatic moment, and there was one, eventually, but honestly the real shift happened slower than that, in pieces so small I didn't notice them as they were happening, only after. Piece 1. Theo started coming into my room at night, not for anything, just to talk. He'd knock twice, lean in the doorway and say something like, "You still up?" even though my light was clearly on, and we'd talk about nothing. His ex-girlfriend from high school who'd messaged him out of nowhere, my weird dream about losing my teeth. It became a thing. Some nights he didn't come in and I noticed the absence more than I wanted to admit. Piece 2. I started noticing how he touched things. This sounds strange, but bear with me. He had this habit of resting his hand flat on the kitchen counter when he was thinking, fingers spread like he was steadying the whole room. I caught myself watching his hand instead of listening to what he was saying more than once and had to mentally slap myself back into the conversation. Piece 3, and this one actually made me mad at myself, was that I started hopping he wouldn't bring girls home. Not out of jealousy exactly, or not jealousy I let myself call jealousy. I told myself it was because I didn't like hearing people through the wall, which, fine, nobody likes that, but it wasn't really about the wall. Piece 4, and this is the one I'm least proud of, is that I started doing this quiet math every time he mentioned a date, counting the days until it probably wouldn't happen again. There was a guy named Adrian he saw a handful of times that spring, and every time Theo came home from seeing him I'd ask how it went in this overly casual voice. And every time he'd say something like, "Fine, I don't know, something's just not there," and I would feel this awful little spike of relief that I had no right to feel and definitely didn't examine, not once, not for months. The night everything actually broke open didn't happen the way you'd think. There was no storm, nobody got hurt, nothing cinematic. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because Theo hated Tuesdays. He had some meeting every Tuesday morning that he called the worst 40 minutes of my week. And that particular Tuesday he came home from work looking like someone had let the air out of him. Didn't say much. Made himself a bowl of cereal for dinner, which was his tell. Cereal for dinner meant something had gone badly. I asked him what happened and he shrugged it off twice before he actually told me. His dad had called. Theo didn't talk about his dad much, and when he did it was in this careful, edited voice like he was giving a deposition. It turned out his dad had said something about Theo still not being serious about anything, meaning his job, meaning his life, and had brought up out of nowhere that Theo's cousin was engaged now, like that was the metric. I said something dumb like, "Your dad sounds exhausting," trying to be light about it, and Theo laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh, it cracked in the middle, and then he just kind of folded, sitting there at our kitchen table with his spoon still in the cereal bowl, and said, "I don't even know why it gets to me. I know he's wrong, I know what he thinks doesn't matter, it still gets to me." I didn't know what to do with my hands. I remember that specifically, standing there not knowing what to do with my hands, and eventually I just put one on his shoulder, which felt insanely inadequate, and he let out this breath like he'd been holding it since the phone call. We ended up on the couch for hours that night, not really watching the show that was on, more using it as an excuse to sit close without it being a whole conversation about sitting close. At some point past midnight he said, quieter than his normal voice, I don't want to be alone tonight, is that weird?" And I said no, it's not weird, and he came and slept in my bed. I need to be clear, this wasn't the moment in the title. This was just two people who were sad and tired lying 6 inches apart on top of the blanket, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. But something happened in that 6 inches that I can't fully explain. Somewhere around 2 in the morning he shifted closer, not touching me, just closer, and said into the dark, "Thanks for not making this a big thing." And I said, "It's not a big thing." And even as I said it, I knew I was lying because my heart was doing something it had no business doing over a guy who was just upset about his dad. That was a Tuesday. The actual night, the one in the title, was almost 3 weeks later, and honestly it started as an argument which nobody ever believes when I tell it, but it did. We'd been dancing around whatever this new thing was for those 3 weeks, this low hum of tension that neither of us named. He started leaving his door open at night. I started finding reasons to walk past his room. Neither of us brought anyone home anymore, not that we talked about why. And then one night we got into a fight, a stupid one, about him borrowing my car without asking and bringing it back with an empty tank. And it escalated way past what an empty tank deserved, both of us saying things sharper than we meant. And at some point he said, "You've been weird with me for weeks, what is your actual problem?" And I said, without deciding to say it, "My problem is I don't know what we're doing." He went quiet, really quiet, and then he said, "What do you mean what we're doing?" And I panicked because I'd said too much and not enough at the same time, and I tried to backpedal, saying something like, "Forget it, it's nothing," and he actually grabbed my arm, not hard, just enough to stop me from walking off, and said, "No, don't do that, don't say nothing and then go hide in your room, tell me what you mean." So I told him badly, in pieces. I told him about the 6 inches in the bed and the hand on the counter and the cereal, and I think somewhere in there I said something humiliating like, "I don't know if I'm imagining a thing that isn't there." And he just looked at me for what felt like an unreasonably long time, and then he said, "You're not imagining it." And that was it, that was the whole confession, 4 words, nothing cinematic about it. I said something smart like, "Okay," because apparently that's the best my brain could do, and he laughed, actually laughed, a real one this time, and said, "Okay, that's it, okay." And I said, "I don't know what else to say, I've never done this with a guy I actually," and I couldn't finish the sentence, and he finished it for me quietly, "actually cared about," and I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Me neither." That's the part people don't expect, that he'd never done this with a guy either, that this whole thing wasn't him being smooth and me being the confused one. We were both confused. We were both standing in that hallway between our two rooms not knowing what came next. What came next was that he stepped closer and asked, actually asked, "Can I kiss you?" Which felt so formal and so unlike either of us that I almost laughed, but I didn't because I said yes and then he did, and it was clumsy, honestly. Our noses bumped and he laughed into it a little, which made me laugh too, and we had to stop and start over, and the second time it worked. I'm not going to walk you through everything that happened after that because some of it isn't really yours to have, it's ours, but I'll tell you that later that night he ended up in my bed again, and this time there was no 6 inches. And in the morning, when the radiator did its clanking thing at some ungodly hour, he groaned into the pillow and said, "I hate that thing," and I said, "You've never complained about it before," and he said, "I've never had a reason to want the room quiet before," and I felt that sentence somewhere behind my ribs for the rest of the day. You'd think that's the happy ending, and honestly for a while it was pretty close to one. We didn't tell people right away. We told our friend group about 2 months in, at a dinner where Theo just casually reached over and took food off my plate without asking, the way you do with someone you're with, and our friend Priya just stopped mid-sentence and said, "Wait, are you too?" And neither of us answered, which was answer enough, and everyone acted like they'd known for months, which fair, we probably weren't as subtle as we thought. But I want to tell you the messier part too, because that's the part that actually made this real for me, not just a nice story. About 4 months into actually being together, not just roommates who kissed once, Theo's dad found out, not from Theo. From an aunt who'd seen something on Theo's social media, a photo that wasn't obviously anything but apparently was enough. And Theo's dad called, and it was bad, worse than the cereal for dinner Tuesday, and Theo came out of that call not sad exactly, more just hollow, and he sat on the edge of our bed and said, "I don't want you to see me like this," which was such a strange thing to say to the one person who was already seeing him fully. I didn't know how to fix it because it wasn't fixable, not by me. And I think that's a thing people don't say enough in these stories, that sometimes you can't kiss the bad thing away, you can just be there while somebody goes through it. So I sat next to him. I didn't say anything smart. I just sat there, and eventually he leaned his head on my shoulder and said, "I'm glad it's you," which didn't answer anything about his dad but answered everything about us. It took a long time for things with his father to get even a little better, and honestly I don't know that they're fully better now. Some things just get managed instead of solved, that's a thing I've had to learn. But Theo got steadier. He stopped bracing every time his phone rang with an unfamiliar area code. He started saying "we" about things without catching himself first. There was another rough patch too, one I almost didn't include because it makes me look bad, but I said I'd tell this honestly, so here it is. About 8 months in, Theo got offered a job in another city, better pay, better title, the kind of offer you're supposed to be thrilled about. And he was thrilled for about a day, and then he got quiet about it in that same edited way he used to get quiet about his dad, and I noticed and didn't ask, which was its own kind of mistake. He finally brought it up on a Sunday, sitting cross-legged on our bed with his laptop open to the offer letter he hadn't answered yet, and he said, "I don't know what to do." And I said, in this flat voice I didn't need to use, "I mean, it's a good opportunity, you should probably take it," which came out so much colder than I meant it, because what I actually meant was, "I'm terrified you're going to leave, and I don't know how to say that without sounding like I'm asking you to give something up for me." He heard the cold part, not the terrified part, and we had this whole clipped, careful fight where neither of us said the real thing. He said, "If you don't want me to go, just say that," and I said, "I'm not going to be the guy who holds you back," and he said, "That's not what I asked," and honestly he was right, that wasn't what he asked, I just answered the question I was less scared of. It took us 2 more days of stiff, polite conversations, the kind where you're both being careful in a way that's somehow worse than yelling, before I actually said it out loud, standing in the kitchen doing dishes I didn't need to be doing. I said, "I don't want you to go, I know that's not fair to say, I know it's your career. I just don't want you to go," and he set down whatever he was holding and just looked at me for a second and said, "That's all you had to say," and I said, "I know, I'm an idiot," and he said, "Yeah, a little," but he was smiling when he said it. He ended up turning the job down, not because I asked him to, he was very clear about that part, but because when he actually sat with it, weighed against us, it wasn't close for him. I've thought about that a lot since. How easy it would have been for both of us to just be too proud to say the truth, and how much we almost lost over 2 days of pretending we were fine. We're not roommates anymore, not in the sense the title means. About a year after that Tuesday, we moved to a one-bedroom because paying for 2 rooms when we were only using one had gotten a little ridiculous, and our old landlord actually laughed when we told him, said he'd had money on us since the day Theo showed up in that jacket that was too warm for the weather. I still think about that 6-inch gap in the bed sometimes, the first night, when neither of us said anything real, when it was just too scared, sad people lying very still next to each other, both of us pretending we weren't listening to the other one breathe. I think about it because it taught me something I didn't expect a roommate situation to teach me, which is that the biggest moments in your life don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just lie there in the dark next to you, quiet, patient, waiting for you to stop pretending you don't feel them. So yeah, that's why I closed the roommate app that day and didn't message Corey back. It's not that I'm not looking, not exactly. It's just that some rooms, once somebody's slept in them the way Theo slept in mine, don't really feel like they're for rent anymore. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting with me through this one. If it makes you feel something, you know what to do. And if you've got a story like this one that started ordinary and turned into everything, I'd genuinely love to hear it.